we have some major Texas Longhorns offensive line news.
Yards shy of the record. Williams breaks a hole. Williams had a record book. Ricky Williams runs to the Hall of Fame. Touchback. Ricky Williams, touchdown.
Young from the shotgun. Back to throw. Vince looks. Under pressure. He'll tuck it in run. Vince to the 5. Young. Touchdown, Texas. Touchdown, Vince Young. He's done it again.
Longhorn Nation, we're back.
Welcome back to the Texas Longhorns on SI podcast. I'm your host, Matt Glatson, joined as always by my co-host, Zach Dimmitt. Zach, we have some big news, a lot of different big news for the Texas Longhorns offensive line that has all come out over the last really 24 to 36 hours, I should say. And I kind of want to start with the new transfer. Patterson from SMU has officially signed with the Longhorns, according to reports. Sark was not asked about him today, but he is a talented offensive lineman that is going to be a valuable depth piece for this team. We didn't necessarily expect to see any more portal additions after the 19 that were already signed, but now we have number 20. And Patterson is an interesting one because he originally signed with Arkansas out of high school and then transferred to SMU, where he appeared in 11 games last season, just 21 snaps on offense. Every one of those snaps came at left guard. He had 16 run block reps and 5 pass block reps. His final 2 outings against Boston College and Louisville, he played in 17 of those total snaps and graded out pretty well. He's 6'3", 323 pounds. Like I said, he'll be a solid depth piece, but against Boston College, he had a 71.3 pass block grade, which is really good, and a 64.8 run block grade. And then against Louisville, he had a 69.7 pass block grade and a 55.6 run block grade. Again, that was just 17 snaps, but a really interesting pickup here for the Longhorns that just makes you feel a little bit better about that offensive line depth when it's all said and done.
For sure. You definitely feel better about it because that was a big concern for a lot of fans heading into this offseason, and understandably so. But I think that there's a lot of reason to feel good about, what the team has in store at that position, not just at the tackle spots or the guard spots, but overall just as a group. Patterson is not going to be a guy that's going to step in, to this locker room with tons of snaps or tons of experience underneath his belt. But at the end of the day, he has been, in the Division I level for a few years now, even though he redshirted one of his seasons at SMU, after starting at Arkansas. He's still been around the game. He's still been learning. So I think for a guy that's going to be in a depth role, that's all you could really ask for. So I think it's a nice addition. It was very surprising, kind of came out of nowhere. Steve Sarkisian had even said, like in late last month in February, that unless something crazy happens, I would imagine we're done, but never say never. And so you see that right now. Never say never. You can always get a late addition out of the portal. Of course, at this point in the offseason, you're not going to be getting a starter level guy unless some teams just completely overlook someone and you just happen to pounce on a guy who ends up being a starter. That's the only way that could really happen. But any portal addition at this point in the offseason was going to be a depth piece. And I think it's a nice move there for Texas because, we talked about, Melvin Siani and Trevor Gooseby and Connor Robertson and of course, Lawrence Seymour. That was more big news about, a week or so ago with his eligibility getting granted. So that your starting group looks pretty good. But, and add Brandon Baker into that mix as well. But, after that, we've talked about it before that the depth is somewhat of a question because you just have guys that are younger, not as experienced. But I think, as we'll talk about in a second, that Sark likes what he's seen from some of those younger guys, but you just don't know what you have. And so to get a guy with some, level of experience with, two different programs, even though at Arkansas, he didn't really play at all. So still experience with the team that's valued because you're still getting practice reps, you're still in the film room, and you're still learning and growing as a player. And so, nice addition there. Hopefully, you would hope that this upcoming season that he doesn't that Patterson doesn't play, because that would mean injury to some of your starters. But hopefully by 2027, he's able to. That would probably be his final year of eligibility, I believe. He'd be able to maybe get some starter level reps by not this season but next season, because that's what Sark has talked about with the portal, is that you're not just getting guys that are just going to be one and done contributors necessarily. You're also looking at guys that can be developed. Because at the end of the day, that's how it is with the portal now. You have to build for the future and not just for this one season ahead. So that's something interesting to think about when it comes to Paris Patterson, if he can be a contributor for 2027, because the offensive line is going to look a lot different after this season. That's just the reality. So nice addition there, and hopefully one that can benefit them for the future.
Yeah, and not the only addition either that they made, which we'll get into in a second. The only one through the portal, but they also got a commit. We'll talk about that real quick in a sec. But this does kind of give you a little bit better of a view of what the depth at offensive line will look like. You don't necessarily have to rely on guys playing multiple positions in a depth role anymore, which I'm a big fan of. And before we finish off this segment, I'll give you a little bit more of an updated projection on what that offensive line might look like. But in terms of the commit, Zach, Texas gets another Westlake kid. This is their first Westlake commit since Colton Vosick, I believe. Jackson Cook, another interior offensive lineman, a 3-star in the 2027 class, so he will not be on campus next fall, of course, but he will be likely in the spring of 2027. Number 62 interior offensive lineman in Texas, number 128 player in Texas, number 963 player nationally. Not a big headliner, but this is a guy who plays for a power program in Westlake that produces a lot of Division I talent. And it's always an exciting thing when you can get more interior offensive linemen for this football team.
Yeah, a lot of, and I get it. A lot of people are gonna, shake their heads and go, "Oh, he's just a 3-star." But come on now. I mean, these guys have to develop. This is a 2027 commit. We've seen so many 3-stars across college football. They arrive on campus not as high rated or high ranked, and they eventually turn into great players. And obviously, Texas has had great success with Westlake guys. Ethan Burke, Michael Taff, obviously. So. Listen, these Westlake guys, they're born and bred as Longhorns for the most part. They're raised into wearing burnt orange, and so they kind of have an extra sort of not chip on their shoulder, but an extra piece of motivation to play well for the program. And so until proven otherwise, I think Jackson Cook can be a great player down the line at Texas. Of course, we don't know that this is still seasons in the future. Before we really see what kind of impact he could have, but don't pay too close attention to the star or the rate or the ranking, because these guys, they have to develop. Not everyone's going to arrive as a 5-star, and so a lot of times 5-stars don't work out either. Obviously, we have Jackson Cook, but look at Jonte Cook. He didn't exactly work out, and he was a 5-star at Texas. So I think it's a nice addition. Anytime you can bolster the future of your offensive line, especially with the local guy, it's a good move in my eyes. And so we'll just have to wait and see a few years from now what he's really able to provide for the program. Yeah,
I mean, you look kind of the history with Austin Westlake and Texas. It's been a pretty good group of players that have come through the 40 acres from the Chaparrals. I mean, Jackson Cook is the latest. We'll see how he works out. But Michael Taff, Ethan Burke, as Zach mentioned, are also both really high-level players for Texas that came from Westlake. Connor Robertson, also a starter at center for you. Colton Vosick is another guy that, we're still waiting for him to blossom, but he's a very talented player and one that's been a depth piece for this roster for a while. Let's not forget Sam Ellinger was an Austin Westlake prospect as well. You look around college football as well, and they're not the only ones. Jaden Greathouse from Notre Dame is also a Westlake kid. Bray Lynch, the national champion winning offensive lineman, also a Westlake kid. So They are littered across college football. This is just another one that is making his way to Division I ranks. His teammate, by the way, Reese Wise, who was the quarterback of Westlake last season, and I can't remember if he's a 27 guy or a 26 guy. I think he's a 27 guy. Let me check that real quick. No, he's a 26 guy. So he just committed to Ole Miss. So another Division I guy from Westlake. So let's pump the brakes on the hesitancy with these kids. They usually turn out pretty well at the college level and contribute at a high level. So that's a good one there for Texas as well. But now we look at this 2026 offensive line, Zach, and it's starting to look pretty interesting with the addition of Paris Patterson. We now have kind of a better idea of what the depth looks like. And then Steve Sarkisian spoke to the media today and gave us some pretty interesting insight as well. He told us that Dylan Sikorsky has been working at both center and guard, so he's kind of cross-training at those positions for depth. Jonte Newman has been working at left tackle. Jaden Chapman, who has spent most of his career as a tackle for the Longhorns, has been playing almost exclusively at left guard so far. And then we also heard a little bit about Jordan Coleman as well. One of the Coleman twins. We have Jordan Coleman and we have Devin Coleman. Jordan has also been working at left tackle. And when Trevor Gooseby was out, he was kind of your number one left tackle, during that time period. And Sark had some really good things to say about him. Like he's a really talented guy. He moves people. He's athletic. He can move around, and is he the most consistent guy in the world? No. I mean, he's going to be a redshirt freshman, so it's going to take him some time to grow, but you like what you've seen out of him so far. And that kind of gives you a better idea of what this depth chart is going to look like, Zach. I mean, we know what the starters are probably going to be. Some combination of Trevor Gooseby and Melvin Siani at your left and right tackle, Connor Robertson at center, then Lawrence Seymour and Brendan Baker are going to be your guards. We don't know officially if which one is going to play left and which one is going to play right. It could go either way. I've been a big proponent of Brendan Baker at the left guard spot, but I'd be fine with him playing right guard. It would be a natural, easy transition for him from right tackle. Lawrence Seymour has played a ton of left guard in his career, so that's fine there. But then behind them, you pretty much know what your second team offensive line is going to look like as well. You got Jordan Coleman at left tackle. You got Jaden Chapman at left guard, Jackson Christian or Dylan Sikorsky at center, Paris Patterson or Dylan Sikorsky at right guard, and then Andre Kojo at right tackle. I mean, that's a pretty good group of 10 right there. And that's not even taking into account the younger guys like John Turntine III, who has been impressing people, and Jackson Christian, who, I am very high on. He is an absolute bully, and I want to see him play some football. And then the other Coleman twin, Devin Coleman, is also a really good player. And then we have Jonte Newman coming in from Texas A&M as well. I mean, this is all of a sudden, this has turned into a pretty deep and talented group.
Yeah, you really can't complain at all if you're a Texas fan about what they've been able to do when it comes to not just addressing the starters on the offensive line, but the depth as well. It's pretty impressive. I mean, it's not too often you see 3 portal guys as depth pieces on the O-line, because most guys out of the portal, they want to come to a new program and start right away. And so credit to Sikorsky and Jonte Newman and now Paris Patterson as well for being, because they wouldn't have committed to Texas if they, or some people wouldn't have committed to Texas knowing that they're going to be on the bench, but these guys are doing that because they probably obviously knew when they made the decision that they're not going to be starters. The coaching staff was probably very open about that with them, and it was pretty obvious just knowing the personnel already on the team. So, I think those guys, Sikorsky, Jonte Newman, and Paris Patterson in particular, I think they're going to see their their decision pay off for them in the future, probably maybe as soon as next season, as being guys that could compete for starting jobs. So, but then of course you talk about some of the commits, the high school commits, like, Jordan Coleman. I think what Sark said about him today stood out quite a lot, because, Trevor Gooseby, of course, was dealing with that shoulder injury, had surgery, but, he's good to go, during spring for the most part, but they kind of easing him back in. And so that gives an opportunity for a guy like Jordan Coleman to get reps at left tackle. And that's a lot of pressure. Sark even said, we've had Trevor Gooseby, we've had Kelvin Banks at left tackle. So there's a lot to live up to. And so, the fact that he's still been impressing while having to go against guys like Lance Jackson or Brad Spence or Colin Simmons, and he's still been able to impress the coaching staff. This is a lot about what he can provide, hopefully down the line. And, you know, you'd hope not as soon as this upcoming season, but if an injury does occur, you know, there's at least confidence in the coaching staff that Jordan Coleman will be able to step in and not completely be a liability or anything. And he'll be able to contribute. But I think the future looks pretty bright on the offensive line, because I mean, the reality is that after the season's over, Trevor Gooseby, Lawrence Seymour, maybe Melvin Siani, Connor Robinson, all those guys are going to be gone. So that's you're going to have to do this all over again next offseason. That's the reality you live in today's college football world. But so you want to be able to build for the future.
Yeah, and I really like the Coleman twins as well. A lot like Jackson Christian, they are not shy. They are not afraid to go up against these big guys like a Colin Simmons, like a Brad Spence. It's or Lance Jackson. Like they are taking the fight to these veteran guys, and that's the kind of thing that you love to see out of these younger offensive linemen. So I can't wait to see how this thing turns out. I mean, I'm not trying to be too much of an optimist here, but I think that this could end up being the most talented / deepest offensive line that Texas has had in the Sark tenure when it's all said and done by the end of the year. And that is saying something, because they had an offensive line where I believe 4 of the 5 guys ended up getting drafted. And that was the 24 offensive line. And I believe Jake Majors also signed an undrafted free agent deal. Yep. So all 5 of those guys ended up in the NFL. Yep. If you can replicate something like that and then add a little bit to it, maybe make it a little bit meaner, a little bit more physical, a little bit better in the run game, then this thing has a chance to really, really be special. But that's not all, we've talked about with Sark, and we're going to get into more of his press conference as we go on in the week. We'll talk about Colin Simmons. We'll talk about wide receivers. We'll talk about all those different things. But Sark also, we're going to transition to Sark in an interview that he had with Chris Lowe real quick, because I thought it was particularly interesting, Zach. Sark is not shying away from the expectations that have been placed on this team so far this spring. I mean, a lot of people believe them to be your favorite to win the national title. I believe Kalshi has odds right now giving them the best chance to win the national title. That's not the only sports book to do that kind of thing either. The expectations are extremely high for this football team. And with good reason. They went out in the transfer portal. They got a bunch of dudes at a bunch of positions of need. And you look, and my buddy Brooks Austin did a breakdown of their depth chart a few days ago. And he, and we consulted about that a little bit before his show. And he legitimately believes that this could be the best roster from top to bottom in college football. And I don't think that that's necessarily a stretch. And with that, obviously, comes the expectations. And here's what Sark had to say about those expectations when it came to his interview with Chris Lowe. He said, "This is it. This is our team. We've got to coach these players. The players are like, this is where I'm at. We don't do anything in our NIL contracts or our incentive base. We're done talking about money. Everyone's deals are done. It's about it's about being a team and becoming the best team we can be. I'm not going to the spring right now worried about if I coach a kid hard that he might leave, or have a player who had a bad practice walking off the field and calling his agent and saying, 'Hey, can you get me out of here? Can you find me a new home?' I don't have coaches. I don't have coaches coming after watching tape saying, 'God, we've got to go find a new safety because this kid can't play.'" And he also said that there's still a lot more out there, unfinished business. Oh, that was Trevor Gooseby. Anyway, the point is, he is not shying away from this thing. He knows that this is the team that he has that he gives him the best chance to win a national title. And I've got a couple more quotes for you from that. But Zach, give me your initial thoughts on what Sark had to say there.
Yeah, you got to love how open and honest Sark is sometimes. He doesn't necessarily always take that approach with the media, but sometimes he'll do these little side interviews and he'll kind of provide some extra context that is really refreshing, because he's just laying it down how it is. I mean, yeah, the deals are done. The money is secured with these guys, and now it's just about going out here and playing. And I think that this is a team that he kind of expected. A few years down the line, once he got the job, that could really, really compete for national championship. Of course, Texas already made it to back-to-back college football playoff semifinals, and those teams were very much capable of competing as well for a title. I mean, they're only a few plays away from making it to the to the biggest game in college football. So, but I think this year's team, now that you've been preparing for the Arch Manning era, you're able to put a lot of talent around him, not only on offense, but then on the defensive end as well. I think this is the team that they've been waiting for, the coaching staff, and now it's here. Because with Arch Manning last season, there was tons of hype surrounding him, and understandably, he kind of was a little bit shaken by it at first. But as Sark said, I don't know if it was in that interview or if it was another interview where he said 99% of kids, if they're in Arch Manning's shoes, would have completely melted at all the pressure, and instead Arch just completely turned things around and turned up his performance. And I think now that what you have in Arch Manning, and I don't think you're going to see any of those early season jitters. Now I think that this team is really ready to take a next step and compete for national championship, because last year's team, despite all the struggles, they were still right there with a really great argument to make the college football playoff. I don't think they necessarily deserve to make it in. You could make an argument with some of those other teams, but they were still right there despite all of the negativity surrounding this team last season, which is pretty incredible. Because you would have thought that Texas was like 6-6 last season, the way some people were talking about him. So I think the way Sark is laying it down is really refreshing to hear. And it's not like it's a new approach from him, but he's just being honest about it. And so now you got to go out and play, and they certainly have the talent to compete for national championship. But at the end of the day, we saw what happened last season, so can't get your expectations too high. You gotta wait and see what happens on the field.
Yeah, but this is the real money quote from Sark. And I completely agree with you, Zach. But this is the real money quote from Sark that really makes you believe that he is confident in this team. He said, "This is what this feels like it used to feel like, and we didn't always have that. We always had some years where it's been one side of the ball and some years where it's been the other side of the ball. This is different." And that, to me, the fact that he sees that this roster is just different than what he has had over the past few years, I think that that's something to be particularly excited about, because he's not just going to come out here and say, last year he was like, well, if we're hoping to play 16 games, we got some things to fix, blah, 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 blah. We're good here, we're good there. We got to figure out some things here. He is saying that this roster is just built different. And I think that that is something that's extremely important. He also went on to say about the team, it's the engagement and the competitive spirit on both sides that jumps out. I'll never forget in those years at Alabama with Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Waddle, and Devontae Smith, and those guys could just be assholes in the way that they went at the defensive guys. But they respected Pat Surtain. They respected Xavier McKinney. There was a lot of that. But at the end of the day, they walked off the field together. That's what it feels like here. I would say probably for the first time, I feel like we have top-level talent across the board, position by positions on both sides of the ball. But yet we also have depth behind it across the board. I felt like we've had years where we've been elite at a couple of positions and maybe we didn't have anything behind it, and it would have been really scary to think about what would happen if certain guys went down. You could go on, and I won't read every single thing that he said, but he just compared this Texas Longhorns team to his Alabama national title team. I don't know if you really understand what that means. That was one of the best teams in the history of college football. That was one of the most prolific offenses in the history of college football. And he says that this team feels like that team. That's a big statement.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to someone like Sark, he's seen the talent up close and personal, not only just the NFL level, obviously, but at the college level. He's seen exactly what it looks like when a team is a national title contender and the guys are just different, like he said. So some coaches may say throw those words around, and it is what it is. But a guy like Sark has seen what that looks like. And so I think it's very worth your while to pay attention to those words, because Yeah, in seasons past, even when some of these good Texas teams have been in the CFP, he hasn't really talked about it like that necessarily. I think the talent on this year's team is just different, like you said, and so now it's about putting it all together. Because the thing about some of the previous teams, I think, in like the Quinn Ewers era and the 2023-2024 teams, I think what those teams had was um, a few more extra years of chemistry building, behind their backs, because that was the group that brought Texas back. If you want to look at it that way, where this year's team, it's a lot of new faces all kind of meshing together. So the talent's there now. It's about seeing how they all mesh together, because I think that's one of the key differences with this year's team and those teams that made it to the CFP a few years back. So, but yeah, obviously tons of reason to be excited. And I think the talent on this team is gonna take Texas far this year, hopefully to the national championship. But certainly you can't be missing the college football playoff again. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, that cannot happen. By the way, I thought it was funny that SEC Mike came out and had like this discussion about, well, first of all, he's like, who's a better head coach right now, Mike Elko or Steve Sarkisian? They picked Mike Elko. I like Mike Elko. That's a ridiculous statement. Also, he came out and said, and they debated who's going to get fired, Sark or Brent Venables, and they went with Sark. And I just, again, absolutely absurd. I get the engagement farming; it's the off season, but let's try not to be absolute shock jocks out here. All right, Zach. Texas football isn't the only Texas athletics team in the news. Obviously, the Longhorns men's and women's team were both in the NCAA tournament. The men's team lost to Purdue. What is the future of the men's basketball team under Sean Miller? We'll talk about that next.
This episode of the Texas Longhorns on SI podcast is brought to you by Custom Built Trailers of Mississippi. Custom Built Trailers is the largest in-stock trailer dealer in Mississippi with a variety of options to choose from. From flatbed goosenecks to bumper pull equipment trailers and car haulers to enclosed trailers and basic utility trailers, we do a little bit of everything. And if we don't have exactly what you're looking for in stock, we can typically have your custom built trailer built in 7 to 10 working days. 0% financing options are available, and we also deliver out of state. So give Custom Built Trailers of Mississippi a call at 601-722-9581 today and let us take care of your hauling needs. Custom Built Trailers of Mississippi. If we don't have it, we'll be glad to build it.
We are back at the Texas Longhorns on SI podcast. I am your host, Matt Glatson, joined as always by my co-host, Zach Dimmitt. And Zach, we'll start with the men's basketball team. A heartbreaking loss to the Purdue Boilermakers in the Sweet 16. I really thought that they could have pulled this one off, and at the last second, Purdue gets the game winner on a tip-in from one of the most annoying players in college basketball in Trey Kaufman-Renn. That Purdue team plays like a European soccer team with the flopping and the hand waving and the cheap stuff. They moved on, and then they got absolutely blitzed in the next round by Arizona, so they got what was coming to them. But heartbreaking loss for the Longhorns. 79-77. Tremone Mark was absolutely unbelievable in that game. He scored 29 points. Dalen Swain, he was also 11 for 15 from the field, by the way, which is unbelievable. Seemed like he couldn't miss. Dalen Swain had 15. Jordan Pope had 12 on a broken foot. So that team really played its ass off. They left everything out on the floor, just didn't end up their way. And all things considered, wildly successful year in year one under Sean Miller, despite all of the downs. There were plenty of ups, and they got further than I think anybody expected them to in the tournament. But now it kind of leads us to the conversation of what's next for the Texas Longhorns men's basketball team. We have an idea of what a basic roster might kind of look like. According to Nick Cody, Modest Voikatitis should be back next year. Obviously, he has yet to announce that or make that decision himself. We also believe that Cam Heide, Declan DeRue, Louis Obiora will all be back. Austin Gooseby, of course, is coming in, and there's also some other recruits coming in. But, I guess we'll start the conversation here, Zach. what should Texas pursue in the transfer portal? I think that they need to find a true point guard. I would like them to find another big, maybe one that can be a little bit more of a, shot blocking presence behind Modest. And I think you need to find a couple more shooters, but where do you see them going? What is priority number one for this basketball team?
Well, it all kind of depends on what happens with Dalen Swain's decision, because whatever decision he makes immediately affects what you're going to do in the portal, because that's a lot of money that'd be going towards him that would otherwise go to another guy out of the portal. And so really just it starts and ends with kind of what he does. So if Swain leaves for the NBA, which is the more likely scenario, you want to get a scoring wing. It's going to be hard to find a guy like Swain out of the portal with his size and his ability and NBA level talent, but you want to try to get that. Of course, regardless of if Swain stays or not, you want to try to get an elite veteran point guard that can really run an offense, because this past season Jordan Pope was, Sean Miller called him the starting point guard, but Jordan Pope is not a point guard. He just isn't.
Mm-hmm.
That just wasn't his strength. He's much more of a shooter. He can score in isolation. He can score off screens, and he was a very talented 3-point shooter, but not really a true playmaker. So that kind of held Texas back at times this season. And yet, despite that, they were still one play away from making it to an Elite Eight, which is insane to think. But yeah, you got to get a veteran point guard that can really manage a game. You can put up some high assist numbers. So it kind of starts with that. But yeah, Dalen Swain and Modest Bogatitis, we of course Nick Cody did say that Modest will be returning, but I asked Modest, one-on-one in the locker room after the Purdue loss, and he kind of gave the professional answer. He said, I'm not focused on next season quite yet. I'm focused on this season. But I think the expectation is that, barring another team coming out of nowhere and offering him an NIL deal that Texas can't match, that Modest will be back next season with Texas, which is big, because if he's another year of growth, another offseason of growth, I think it'll look great, because he really came on at the end of this past season. So, but yeah, it really just starts with Dalen Swain. You don't really know exactly what's going to happen with this roster until you know for sure what Dalen Swain will do, and it is kind of tough the way that the calendar works out. If he wants to really pursue the NBA draft, he could still end up coming back to college, but then that leaves Texas in a hole, because if he's taking all that time testing the waters or whatever, and by that time all these other portal guys have already made a decision and gone to other teams, and Texas is kind of left figuring out what's Swain going to do. Should we have pursued another guy while he's testing out the draft waters? It's a tough situation, because he deserves to get that feedback, but also Texas needs to start making moves in the portal, and can't necessarily just wait around for his decision. So yeah, we still don't really know exactly what's going to happen. Simeon Wilcher is a guy who I think could enter the portal. Camden Heide said after the game that he wants to return, but we'll see. I mean, he was a consistent starter on the team, but his usage was not really there, and he was invisible at times, in my opinion. Aside from a few big threes, of course, he had a big three against Gonzaga to send Texas to the Sweet 16, but overall, there was a lot of times where he wasn't as impactful as people might have hoped. Simeon Wilcher, though, I think his minutes were really down. He had some turnover problems. He's a guy who I think can enter the portal, because he's going to be heading into the senior year, and I don't know if he wants to ride the bench behind Austin Gooseby. So, John Clark, another guy who redshirted this past season, does he want to continue to serve a bench role, or is he going to want to go to a place at a lower level where he can get some real playing time? Well, these are some things we're just going to have to watch for. But yeah, not really any movement so far yet with Texas on that end. No one's really entered the portal. No one's really announced a decision, but a lot of these teams, a lot of these players have started to do that. So I think it's only a matter of time before we see what some of these guys do. But yeah, like I said, a few times already, it starts and ends with what Dalen Swain does, because once that domino falls, the rest of the roster can kind of fall into place, because then not only your personnel, but purely just from a money standpoint, you kind of know what you're going to be dealing with. So there's just some things to watch for.
Yeah, and that leads me to my next question, Zach, that I think a lot of people who are listening to this podcast are wondering. And Dalen Swain, we don't know whether he's coming back or not. He has a really big decision to make. He could be a fringe lottery guy. I think his stock probably slipped a little bit over the last, couple of weeks of the season, but he would be a first round pick. I'm pretty confident in saying that.
Yeah.
Keeping him out of the conversation, assuming he goes to the NBA draft, which I think is probably your most likely outcome. What is your starting five next season? Like what do we think that this could look like? And if we have a transfer in one of these spots, you can just say transfer. But I think that there's a couple of positions that if what we know is true, that we know this is going to be who's in those spots. I think that you can pencil down Modest as your center, assuming he returns. I think you can probably pencil in Cam Heide as a starter, at least as of right now. But after that, I'm not entirely sure, because you lose Tremont Mark, you lose Kendall Weaver, you lose Jordan Pope, probably Simeon Wilcher is what we're guessing, although that's not necessarily confirmed. You get Nick Cody back. You lose probably Dalen Swain. I mean, there's going to be a lot of flux in this roster. So what do you see the starting five being in 2026, 2027?
Yeah, not just quickly. Yeah, I want to, confirm that obviously I'm just speculating about Simeon Wilcher potentially leaving. That's just my guess based on his minutes. But overall, I think the starting lineup could look something like Austin Gooseby at your 2, Cam Heide at your 3, three or the 4, and then Modest at the center, obviously. But then your starting point guard and your starting 3 or 4, depending on who it is. Those are 2 portal guys. Texas is not going to be able to really compete in the SEC next season unless they get 2 starting level guys out of the portal. That's just the reality. Obviously, in the first year under Sean Miller, your two leading scorers were out of the portal, and Dalen Swain and Modest Vogatitis. So it's probably going to be a similar sort of recipe there. We just don't know who those guys will be quite yet. But you got to get a starting level point guard. Austin Gooseby, I think he has a lot of scoring ability, but putting him in a starting point guard role in the SEC in year 1 as a true freshman, probably not the best thing to do. He's super talented, but it's just a lot of pressure on a guy right away, especially when you have tournament aspirations. So I think if you get a veteran guy at that spot, but then Camden Heide, he can play the 4. Not that he's an incredible rebounder or defender or anything like that, but he has the size. I like him better at a 3. And if you can get a scoring 4 who can handle the ball and can probably lead your team in scoring next season at the power forward spot, that's going to be a nice starting lineup for me. And then off the bench, you have guys like Bill Ogden, who can provide some nice minutes as a shooter, and Joe Sterling, another true freshman coming in, very good shooter as well. There's some really good shooters in this upcoming freshman class for Texas. So you add a Nick Cody off the bench. Declan Duru, I think, has some nice potential as a defensive guy. But yeah, there's probably going to be multiple portal additions for this team this offseason. So we don't really know what it's going to look like until we start seeing some of those dominoes fall. But that's kind of what the starting lineup will look like for me, because it's hard to put a true starting 5 with names in those places right now, because it's not realistic to think that Texas won't be starting 2 portal guys next season.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, it's hard to say right now who those other 2 starters are going to be. There has been an influx of players who have entered the portal thus far. Is there anybody that's standing out to you so far, Zach, that you think Texas could potentially pursue, or at least that would make sense for the Longhorns? I mean, I know that there's a couple of names off the top of my head. Paulius Murakaskis from St. Mary's would be a great addition at power forward / center. He's a big guy. I don't know that necessarily fits what Sean Miller wants to do offensively, because he played for a St. Mary's team that was a little bit slower and a little bit more defensively oriented. But then there's a guy like Dedan Thomas from the point guard from LSU, who I think would be very interesting. So, I mean, how about you? Is there anybody else that's standing out on that list that you think that would make sense for the Longhorns, or are you still kind of waiting to see that domino drop?
Yeah, kind of waiting to see who stays and who goes. I do think Miles Byrd out of San Diego State. He's listed as a shooting guard. Interesting name to watch though. Stands at 6'7", 190. I mean, this guy, lots of size. And do you want him to play that point guard spot alongside Austin Gooseby and they kind of trade off that? We'll see about that. I haven't heard anything about that with Miles Byrd regarding him, but he's one of the top available guys in the portal right now. So if Texas wants to take a swing at him, might as well. But Colby Garland out of San Jose State, San Jose State had like less than 10 wins this season, but he averaged 20 points, 4.6 assists. He's already in the portal again, and he's going to be on his fourth school in 4 years. And but after averaging 20 points, at the Mountain West level, is he ready to maybe take the next step and be a guy that can contribute for Texas as a starter? We'll see. He's played at Drake, he's played at Longwood, so he doesn't have necessarily power level experience, but he has the numbers that definitely catch your eye a little bit. One guy who I think if somehow Modest Bukatitis were to be offered a NIL deal that he can't refuse, I think Somto Surreal, the center from Georgia, he just entered the portal today. If somehow Modest is not on this team next year, you got to take a swing at him because this guy led the country in blocks this past season. He is just a dominant force at the center spot, way different than Bukatitis. He's not going to be a guy that Texas is going to get as a bench role behind Bukatitis. It's not a reality. But if somehow Bukatitis is is out of the picture, which I don't think will happen, he's a guy you should probably target. But a few other point guards to mention. You mentioned Dede Thomas out of LSU. He's got experience. Jackson Shellstad out of Oregon, really nice scoring guard, listed as a point guard who I think can play that spot, but he's more of a scorer in my opinion. And then you got Jalen Lowe from Kentucky. He was the only thing is that he was injured all this past season, but another talented guy there. Finsley Bizjack out of Butler. I've watched him for a few years now, and he's actually pretty impressive scorer there. He's actually a Texas guy as well. So there's just a few names to watch. Not anything set in stone when it comes to connections with these guys to Texas quite yet. But just interesting names to watch when it comes to who's available in the portal. But there may be some guys that Texas wants that aren't even in the portal quite yet. So this is just kind of a waiting game right now. But when it comes to the portal, a lot of these things kind of are quiet at first, and then they all kind of start falling together pretty rapidly. So it'll only be probably another week or so before we really see some of the action going down because the portal does open April 7th.
Yeah, and the point here is a lot is still to come for Texas basketball. When it comes to roster construction, what this team is going to look like. It's a very exciting future because I think that Sean Miller really proved over the last few weeks of the season that he can put together, like even if he doesn't have the roster that he necessarily wants, that the pieces all don't necessarily fit the way that they need to fit to run his offense, he can still get the best out of his team when it matters most. If Texas and Chris Del Conte can see that, which I think that they do, and they really believe that they can invest in him as a head coach and get him the players that he wants, I think he could end up doing something very, very special in Austin when it's all said and done. Also, Zach, before we get out of here, I think we would be a little remiss if we did not mention the Texas women's basketball team.
Yep.
They are absolutely unbelievable, number one. They punched their ticket to the Final Four with an absolute drubbing of the Michigan Wolverines. They win that game 77-41. They held Michigan to 23% shooting, 13% from behind the arc. Madison Booker led the way with 19. Kyla Oldacre had 12 off the bench. You also had 15 from Justice Carlson, 11 from Brea Cunningham. This looks like a team that very well could compete for a national championship. Just really special stuff from them last night. But one of the funny things is, there was all this talk about how Michigan was staring them down as they walked into the arena. And I don't really know that they were staring them down, Zach. I think that they were kind of looking at them like, oh, I don't think we want this smoke. This is going to be tough. And that's it. That's what ended up happening. Texas just absolutely drugged them across the floor. And it's nice to see the women's team kind of carrying the torch for Texas basketball heading into the Final Four. So really good stuff from them.
Yeah, I mean, it is incredible to see some of the dominance at the top when it comes to women's basketball. I mean, Michigan was seen as a team by some that could sneak into the Final Four as a 2 seed. I mean, they had a terrific season, and Texas made them look like a 16 seed. I mean, that is just incredible work by Vic Schaefer and that staff. Last year making it to the Final Four, you come up short, but this year's team. It's very special, and it'd be really heartbreaking if this team is not able to win a national title because of what Rory Harmon has done for this program, what Madison Booker has done, Kyla Oldacre coming over as a transfer. She's been so big the past 2 seasons. It would be heartbreaking to see this team not win at all. But it's going to be super, super tough. They play UCLA, who only has 1 loss this season, and that's going to be in Phoenix, and so. UCLA has a little bit of kind of a travel advantage there, but then the winner of that game has to play UConn or South Carolina. I mean, it regardless of who ends up winning the women's national title, it's going to be an absolute bloodbath between these teams because there's so much talent. All 4 number 1 seeds making it to the Final Four. There's just so much talent in Phoenix, for this year's Final Four, and certainly Texas is right there in the mix. But it's kind of hard to separate UConn, South Carolina, Texas, UCLA. I think UCLA, I mean, they only have 1 loss, but I think Texas, South Carolina, and UConn are probably in their own tier. And so now it's just about who can play their best on a given night. It's going to be really, really tough. But this Texas team has so much heart. They've been through so much together. I really just want to see this team win it for Rory Harmon and Madison Booker. I mean, those two have just been, and same with Jordan Lee as well. I'd be remiss not mention her. But they've just done so much for this program, and to see a guy like Vic Schaefer, who I think is just beloved on the 40 acres, to see him win a title with this year's group in particular. He'll win titles down the line at Texas. We already know that. But this year's group is just so special, and the way that they've the things that they've done for Texas over the past couple of years has been so big that I just really want to see this year's group win it. But we'll have to wait and see. It's going to be a really, really tough out, even if Texas does make it to the title game, because they'll have to face UConn or South Carolina, which is not an easy task at all.
Yeah, and look, I've always loved Vic Schaefer, but the fact that less than 24 hours after a dominant win over Michigan in the Elite Eight, the dude goes turkey hunting and bags himself a bird. Gotta love that. That's my head coach right there. Texas will face off against UCLA on April 3rd at 8:30 on ESPN. They are favored by 1.5. And then on the other side of the bracket at 6 p.m., it will be 35-3 South Carolina, who Texas is 2-1 against this year. That should be noted. They did beat the Gamecocks twice, versus the 38-0 UConn Huskies. I don't know how that program keeps doing stuff like that. It's absolutely crazy. But they're a really, really good team as well. So it's going to be a fight, but I think Texas does have a really good opportunity to do this and take this thing home. It's a really special team. So we'll see how that ends up. But thank you so much for tuning in to this edition of the Texas Longhorns on SI podcast. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and rate our podcast, and comment down below on YouTube to let us know your thoughts. It really helps us out in the algorithm. But most importantly, be sure to tell somebody you love them. We'll catch you in the next one.